Cain Trenton's wrists burned where the bindings dug into his skin, the rough fibers chafing against wounds that had yet to heal. Blood, half-dried, traced erratic paths down his chest, where the remnants of his battle-worn armor had been stripped away. The translucent fabric draped around his waist was an insult more than a covering, a ceremonial wrap that marked him not as a prisoner of war, but as a sacrifice. Suspended beneath the towering archway of ancient stone, Cain forced his breathing to remain steady, his muscles tense against the weight of his own body. Beyond the arch, the alien village sprawled before him, a dazzling expanse of crystalline structures rising into the violet dusk, reflecting the twin suns' dying light in cascading spectrums. The air shimmered with an eerie hum, the resonance of the temple at the heart of the settlement. This was no mere battlefield detritus or looters' camp. The beings who had taken him, the scavenger tribes, as human forces called them, were more than opportunistic pillagers. They were a civilization steeped in mysticism, in rituals older than human history, and he had been deemed worthy of one such ritual. Sacrifice. A low murmur rippled through the assembled figures below, their violet-hued skin luminous under the setting suns. Their garments were woven from fibers that caught the light like liquid metal, their elongated eyes drinking in his every movement. The scent of incense and burning minerals thickened the air. The altar, a wide platform of polished crystal, veined with pulsing blue light, loomed before him. The priesthood, draped in ceremonial robes adorned with gold sigils, began to chant. Then she appeared. She moved like liquid moonlight, her long violet hair cascading around her shoulders, the deep-cut corset and slit skirt revealing the graceful curves of her form. At her hip, a golden dagger gleamed, a symbol of both power and purpose. The High Priestess. Cain felt the moment their eyes met. It was more than recognition. It was a collision, a silent exchange in which something ancient, something inexorable, passed between them. She halted before the altar, tilting her chin as she studied him, her gaze like a blade pressing against his exposed throat. "The offering is strong," one of the elders declared, his voice like shifting gravel. "The goddess will be pleased," another murmured in agreement. The priestess, Lethia, they called her, took a step closer, her fingertips hovering just above his chest. Not touching, but close enough that the warmth of her presence sent a shiver through him. "Indeed," she murmured. There was something in her tone. Not reverence, not devotion, something else entirely. Cain's jaw clenched. If this was how he was going to die, he would meet it with defiance. But then, she leaned in. The heat of her breath against his skin was a whisper of warning. "Don't fight when they release you," she murmured. "And don't eat the food they bring. It's laced with the herbs to weaken you." Cain's breath hitched, his mind scrambling to make sense of her words. Was this a trick? A test? She met his gaze again, and in that instant, he knew this was no lie. She had other plans. The ceremony continued as if nothing had changed, though Cain now saw it through sharpened eyes. Every gesture, every spoken phrase, took on new meaning. He forced himself into stillness, into compliance, as the elders prepared the rites. When they lowered him from the archway, his knees nearly buckled, but he caught himself, feigning weakness. They guided him toward the altar, placing offerings before him, strange fruits, shimmering in iridescent hues. He feigned hunger, letting the pieces touch his lips before subtly discarding them when no one was watching. As the twin moons rose, the High Priestess stepped forward. She was adorned differently now, her ceremonial jewelry glinting in the moonlight, her movements more deliberate, charged with unseen power. She began to dance. The rhythm of the drums matched the pulse in Cain's veins, her movements hypnotic, fluid, ancient. The gathered tribe watched, entranced. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a voice that rang through the sacred temple, Lethia cried out, "The goddess speaks." A hush fell over the assembly. Even the elders stiffened, their expressions shifting from authority to uncertainty. "She accepts our offering," Lethia continued, turning toward Cain, her voice trembling with divine fervor. "But not in the way we intended." A murmur of confusion spread through the crowd. "The goddess has shown me visions," Lethia declared, her eyes blazing as she approached Cain. "This warrior is meant for something greater. His blood has already been spilled in battle. His sacrifice has already been made. One of the elders, his features shadowed by disbelief, stepped forward. But the right. The sacrifice has been accepted, Elder, Lethia interrupted. Spiritually. Cain, playing his role, let his head loll slightly, his body swaying as if under the herb's influence. The power of her deception was masterful. Within moments, the tide shifted. The elders, wary yet unwilling to challenge the high priestess directly, murmured their reluctant acceptance. And just like that, he had been spared. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. The chamber where Lethia brought him was unlike anything Cain had ever seen. Crystalline walls pulsed with ambient energy, their surfaces reflecting fractured constellations of light. The air was thick with the scent of minerals and something unidentifiable, something old, powerful. She loosened his bindings, watching as he rolled his shoulders, wincing from his injuries. That was quite a performance, Cain muttered. Lethia arched a delicate brow. Would you rather have been sacrificed? He flexed his fingers, testing his movement. Guess I owe you a thank you. You owe me far more than that. Cain's gaze sharpened. What exactly do you want from me? Lethia hesitated for the first time. Then, carefully, she lifted a vial from a carved pedestal and uncorked it. The liquid inside shimmered like molten gold. Our sacred energy, she explained. No human should be able to wield it. Cain frowned. And Lethia met his eyes, her expression unreadable. And I believe you can. Silence stretched between them. The impossible weight of her words settled over him. This wasn't just about saving him. This was about something far greater. Something that would change everything. And Cain, a wounded warrior meant for sacrifice, had just become the center of a destiny he had never asked for. Cain Trenton's gaze locked onto the vial in Lethia's hands, the golden liquid within shifting like living light. The crystalline walls around them pulsed in response to its presence, casting fractured beams of color across the chamber. No human should be able to wield it, she had said. And yet, she stood before him, offering the impossible. Cain exhaled, his mind still catching up to the reality of his situation. Hours ago, he had been bound for slaughter beneath alien moons. Now, he stood unshackled in the chamber of a high priestess who had defied her own people to spare his life. What makes you think I can? He asked, his voice low. Lethia's violet eyes flickered with something unreadable. She stepped closer, the scent of rare minerals and faint incense clinging to her skin. I saw it in my visions, she said. You're not just a man lost on the battlefield. You were meant to come here, meant to change things. Cain's jaw tightened. He had never put much stock in prophecy, in unseen forces dictating his fate. He was a soldier. His life had always been shaped by orders, tactics, and the brutal certainty of war. And yet, his skin still tingled where her fingertips had hovered near him during the ceremony, a strange energy lingering in his blood, in his bones. Say I believe you, he murmured. Say I drink whatever that is. What happens next? Lethia studied him, the weight of her answer settling between them before she spoke. Then we see if the goddess truly chose you, or if I made a terrible mistake. Cain huffed a dry, humorless chuckle. Comforting. He held out his hand. Lethia hesitated only a moment before pressing the vial into his palm. It was warmer than he expected. Not hot. More like something alive, pulsing faintly with its own rhythm. Cain uncorked it. The scent was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Metallic, sweet, electric. Drink slowly, Lethia instructed. If your body rejects it, then we'll know I wasn't meant for this. Cain finished grimly. And with that, he tipped the vial to his lips. The moment the liquid touched his tongue, Cain knew something was wrong. Or rather, something was changing. The taste was neither bitter nor sweet. It was power, raw and untamed, searing its way down his throat. His muscles locked, his spine arching involuntarily as heat exploded in his chest, flooding outward through every limb. The crystalline walls of the chamber pulsed violently, as if responding to him, vibrating with a frequency that made the very air tremble. His vision blurred. No, not blurred. Shifted. He saw flashes of light, of vast structures rising and falling in an endless cycle, of figures that flickered in and out of existence, their bodies formed of shimmering constellations. The temple, the tribe, the war, and her, Lethia. She stood before him, unchanged yet different, her presence impossibly vast, her energy entwined with his in ways he could not yet understand. Then the vision shattered. Cain hit the ground, his breath ragged, his body still burning from within. Every nerve felt alight, every muscle strung tight like a bowstring about to snap. Lethia was already at his side, her hands pressing against his bare chest. A cool sensation spread from her touch, trying to calm the fire raging beneath his skin. "Cain," she whispered, her voice laced with uncertainty. His breaths came in uneven gasps, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. "I'm still here," he rasped. Relief flickered across her features before her expression hardened into something else. "Calculation. Oh, you didn't reject it," she murmured. Cain let out a strained laugh. "Yeah, but I don't think I was exactly built for it either." "You will be," Lethia said, her hands never leaving his skin. "You're already adapting." Cain glanced down at himself, only now noticing the faint shimmer tracing the old scars across his chest. The markings were not his own. They were forming, weaving across his skin like the ancient symbols he had seen carved into the temple's sacred stones. He clenched his fists. Beneath his fingertips, a crackle of energy responded, as if waiting for his command. Something had awakened within him, and there would be no turning back. The next day, Cain stood before the elders. The temple's inner sanctum was carved from a single, massive crystal, its jagged walls catching the pale morning light and refracting it into swirling ribbons that danced across the chamber. Lethia stood at his side, her presence a steady force against the scrutiny of the gathered council. The elders watched him with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely veiled suspicion. Elder Moran, the most traditional among them, was the first to speak. "You claim this human has been touched by the goddess?" "He does not claim it," Lethia corrected smoothly. "He bears the marks." Moran's gaze drifted to Cain's bare chest, where the newly formed patterns still shimmered faintly against his skin. "Such markings do not appear on outsiders," another elder muttered. "Nor do humans drink the essence and survive," Lethia added. A murmur spread through the chamber, the weight of her words settling among them like a storm cloud. Moran's eyes narrowed. "Survival does not mean he was chosen. It could mean he is dangerous." Cain crossed his arms. "Funny. I thought the point of all this was figuring out which one it was." A few of the elders bristled at his tone, but Lethia pressed on. "There is a way to know for certain," she said. The murmuring stopped. Moran's expression darkened. "You cannot be suggesting." "The ritual of unity," Lethia finished, undeterred. A beat of silence. Then, all at once, the chamber erupted into overlapping voices. Some shocked, some intrigued. Cain turned his head slightly toward Lethia, lowering his voice. "Want to explain what exactly that means before you go signing me up?" She kept her gaze forward, unreadable. "It is the most sacred of rituals, a test of spiritual and physical connection." Cain frowned. "And if we fail? Then the goddess did not choose you." He exhaled sharply. "And what happens to me if the goddess decides she didn't choose me?" Lethia's silence was answer enough. Cain's pulse pounded. The entire room was watching, judging. Then, before he could overthink it, he said the only thing he could. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's see if your goddess made the right call." Lethia turned to face him fully for the first time since they entered the chamber. The fire in her violet eyes was unmistakable. "It is decided," she announced. The elders rose. The decision was made. In 3 days, at moonrise, Cain would enter the temple's sacred heart. And if he failed the ritual, if the energy between them did not align, he would not leave it alive. 3 days. Cain spent them in near isolation, preparing for a ritual he still didn't fully understand. The chamber Lethia had given him was smaller than the one where she had first brought him, its crystalline walls humming faintly with unseen energy. He had no weapons, no armor, only the strange symbols that continued to spread across his skin, marking him as something neither wholly human nor truly one of them. He still hadn't figured out what the hell that meant. What he did know was that this so-called ritual of unity wasn't just some harmless tradition. The way the elders had reacted, the way Lethia had spoken about it, this was serious. It was a test, a final judgment. And if he failed? Cain exhaled sharply, running a hand through his short, dark hair. Well, he had been ready to die before. What was one more time? A soft chime echoed through the chamber. A moment later, Lethia stepped inside. She had changed from her usual ceremonial garb. Instead of elaborate robes, She wore something simpler, an indigo dress of sheer fabric that clung to her form, adorned only with delicate golden chains around her wrists and throat. Her violet eyes flickered across him, assessing. "You ready?" Cain smirked, crossing his arms over his bare chest. "As ready as I'll ever be for a ritual I know next to nothing about." She sighed, stepping closer. "I told you, it is a test of our connection. Our energies must align in perfect harmony. If they do, the temple will acknowledge you. If they don't." Her voice trailed off. Cain arched a brow. "The temple kills me. The energies reject you," she corrected carefully. "And rejection can be unforgiving." "Unforgiving," Cain echoed dryly. "Great. Love that." Lethia hesitated, her fingers brushing against the edge of his hand. The touch was brief, but the air between them crackled in response, the unseen force that had been growing between them these last few days shifting, twisting, pulling. "You're stronger than you know," she said quietly. "Stronger than any of them expected." Cain searched her face. "Even you." A muscle in her jaw tightened. "I have to be certain," she admitted. "And so do you." Cain exhaled, his smirk fading into something more serious. "Then let's get this over with." Lethia studied him for a long moment, then nodded. At moonrise, the ritual would begin, and by the time the night ended, Cain Trenton would either be accepted or erased. The sanctum of crystalline truth was a place few had ever entered. Cain understood why the moment he stepped inside. The temple's inner heart was massive, vast enough that the ceiling stretched so high above them. He could barely make it out through the refracted light of the sacred crystals that pulsed along the walls. The chamber was shaped like an octagon, with 8 towering pillars of pure crystal, each humming in a deep, resonant frequency that Cain could feel vibrating in his bones. And in the very center, a platform of living energy. The structure shimmered, shifting between solid and ethereal, existing somewhere between physical form and raw power. The patterns carved into its surface glowed softly, waiting, watching. A crowd had gathered, though none dared to step too close. The elders stood in their ceremonial robes, their expressions unreadable. Lethia was already waiting for him, standing barefoot on the platform, her markings glowing with soft luminescence beneath the sheer fabric of her dress. She held out a hand. Cain stepped forward. The moment their fingers met, the platform flared to life. A pulse of golden light rushed outward, flickering like a heartbeat. Cain sucked in a breath as a familiar sensation coiled through his chest, the energy, the power. It had been inside him ever since the night he drank from that damned vial. He hadn't known what to do with it, hadn't even tried to wield it. But now, the temple was calling to it, demanding a response. The energy inside him answered. The platform solidified beneath his feet, the symbols beneath him shifting, realigning. Around them, the pillars of crystal began to hum louder. Lethia's voice was steady as she began the invocation. "We stand before the goddess, bound in body and spirit." Cain exhaled, letting his mind focus, letting himself feel the connection that had been forming between them all along. The platform responded, pulsing brighter. Lethia stepped closer. "Our energies entwine, unbroken by doubt, unshaken by fear." She lifted a hand, placing it flat against his chest. The warmth of her skin sent a sharp jolt through him, his markings flaring in response. "The temple shall bear witness," she whispered. Cain swallowed. He felt it, the pull, the unseen tether between them. It was real. Lethia took a slow breath, searching his gaze. "And now?" She lifted her other hand, resting it against his bare shoulder. "Follow me." Cain barely had time to process before the energy engulfed them both. The world fractured. Cain's vision shattered into 1,000 refracted lights, the temple around him dissolving into swirling patterns of gold and violet. He felt himself falling, weightless, his body no longer his own. Somewhere, distantly, he felt Lethia's presence, her mind pressing against his, guiding him deeper. Then, the voices came. Not spoken, not whispered, sung. He felt them more than he heard them, a chorus of energy rippling through his very bones. Visions flickered through his mind, fragments of something ancient, something vast. He saw Lethia, standing at the edge of a glowing abyss. He saw himself, bathed in light that was both his own and not his own. And then, a shadow. Something dark, unseen, waiting. A presence that did not belong. Cain's breath hitched, his heart hammering. "Lethia," he gasped. She turned to him, her eyes widening. "You see it?" she whispered. The temple shuddered. Cain clenched his jaw. Whatever was out there, whatever had been lurking beneath this sacred ritual, it was watching them now. The energy surged, and suddenly, pain, raw, searing, tearing through his body. Cain dropped to one knee, gasping as the energy inside him raged against something unseen. His markings flared too bright, too wild, the connection between him and Lethia shifting, fraying, breaking. Lethia reached for him. No, she breathed. Stay with me. The energy fought back. Cain screamed as the temple's resonance turned violent, the crystals around them shaking, the air itself splitting apart. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went dark. Darkness swallowed Cain whole. Not the kind that came with sleep or unconsciousness. This was something deeper, heavier, a force that pressed in on him from all sides. It was as if the energy that had once surged through his veins had been ripped away, leaving behind a vast emptiness. His body felt weightless, suspended in the void. Then a pulse. Not from him, but from somewhere beyond. Cain sucked in a sharp breath as a sensation coiled through him, something old and unfathomable. It wasn't the temple's energy, nor the connection he had felt with Lethia. This was something else. Something vast, watching, waiting. Then, a voice, not Lethia's. You are not meant to be here. The words didn't echo, they simply existed, resonating through his mind like an unshakable decree. Cain gritted his teeth. Yeah? Tell that to the ones who dragged me into this mess. The presence remained silent for a moment. Then another pulse. A shift. You disrupt the balance. A sharp pain lanced through Cain's skull, his vision momentarily splitting flashes of memories that were not his own. A great war, fought in the heart of the stars. A temple not yet a ruin, but a beacon of unimaginable power. A figure, wreathed in shadows, standing at the center of it all. Then, his own reflection. But it wasn't just him. The markings on his skin had spread further, curling over his arms like living vines, shimmering with the same golden energy that pulsed in the heart of the temple. Cain felt a deep, primal certainty settle into his bones. He was changing. But into what? Then a hand, gripping his wrist. The moment their skin touched, the darkness shattered. Cain's body slammed back into reality with violent force. The temple's chamber reformed around him in fractured glimpses, the towering crystal pillars, the elders, the sacred platform beneath his feet. The air was thick with unstable energy, the resonance of the temple faltering. And Lethia. She was on her knees beside him, her breathing ragged, her eyes wide with alarm. The moment Cain's gaze met hers, he felt it, the bond between them, straining under the weight of whatever had just happened. The ritual's energy was still trying to align, but something had interfered, and now the temple itself was struggling to reconcile what it had seen. Cain clenched his fists. The symbols on his skin were still changing. More intricate, more alive. And the worst part? The temple was reacting to him. The once rhythmic pulses of the crystal pillars had turned erratic, as if sensing something foreign within him. Something it didn't trust. A hushed murmur spread through the gathered onlookers, their violet eyes fixed on Cain. Some radiated awe, others fear. Then, Elder Moran stepped forward. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was sharp with accusation. You brought something else into this ritual, he said. Something not of the goddess. Cain gritted his teeth. I didn't bring anything. Whatever's messing with your sacred test, it found me. The energy around them crackled, reacting to the tension in the room. Lethia placed a hand on his arm, an attempt to steady him, or maybe to calm the storm that was still building. He speaks the truth, she said. Something interrupted the bond. Something ancient. Elder Amara, the oldest of the council, narrowed her gaze. The temple did not reject him outright, she said slowly. That is telling. Morin scoffed. It didn't accept him either. Cain exhaled sharply. Look, if your goddess wants to smite me, she can do it herself. Otherwise, someone needs to start explaining what the hell just happened. The silence that followed was heavy. Then, Amara turned toward Lethia. Priestess, she said. What did you see? Lethia hesitated. Cain felt her uncertainty, felt the way her energy was still tangled with his, as if trying to unravel what had just transpired. Finally, she spoke. I saw a shadow. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Not a presence of malice, she clarified quickly, but something watching. Something waiting. Moran's expression darkened. Then we are already too late. Lethia stiffened. What do you mean? The elder's lips pressed into a thin line. The prophecy. Cain sighed. Of course there's a prophecy. Amara ignored him, addressing Lethia directly. The texts speak of an outsider who would enter the temple's sacred bond. One who would disrupt its balance. The goddess's chosen, or the one who would bring ruin? Cain crossed his arms. You're saying I could be either a messiah or a disaster waiting to happen. Great odds. Amara's gaze sharpened. It was never clear which the outsider would be. Lethia inhaled sharply. Why was I never told of this? Because we did not believe it would happen in our lifetime, Amara admitted. And because the last time the temple rejected an outsider, it nearly destroyed itself. Cain tensed. What happened to them? Amara's gaze did not waver. It unmade him. A chill crept down Cain's spine. But before he could process the weight of those words, the temple shuddered. The crystal formations around them trembled, their luminescence flaring brightly, too brightly. The platform beneath Cain's feet pulsed again, erratic, as if the temple itself were struggling to decide. And then, the energy exploded outward. The force sent Cain staggering back, a surge of golden and violet light surging through his veins. It wasn't painful, not exactly, but it was too much. Too vast. Too uncontained. His pulse hammered. Something inside him was waking up. And then Lethia cried out. Cain's attention snapped to her just in time to see the markings on her skin beginning to shift, changing in tandem with his. The bond between them wasn't just energy anymore. It was evolving. The temple had seen fit to spare him, but it was no longer just about Cain. Whatever was happening, it was happening to her, too. And Cain had the sinking realization that the goddess, or whatever force had been watching him in the void, wasn't done with them yet. The chamber pulsed with raw, uncontained power. Cain staggered, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps as the temple's resonance reverberated through him. His skin burned, not from fire, but from something deeper, something reaching into his very core and rewriting him from the inside out. And then there was Lethia. She had fallen to one knee, her palm pressed against the temple floor. The shifting symbols that had once belonged only to Cain were now spreading across her skin, their golden glow creeping up her arms, curling over her throat like living vines of light. This wasn't supposed to happen. Lethia was the high priestess, the goddess's chosen, the temple's vessel. The energy should have been hers alone. And yet, Cain had brought something with him, something older than the temple, older than their goddess. And now, it was inside both of them. The air crackled. Then, Moran's voice cut through the chaos. You see now, the elder hissed, stepping forward, his expression contorted with barely restrained fury. He is not of the goddess. He is a corruption. Cain barely had time to react before a second voice. Asterisk Amaris. Asterisk rose in sharp defiance. Enough. The eldest of the council turned on Moran, her eyes blazing with something ancient, something dangerous. The temple did not reject him, nor did it consume him. It has marked him. It has marked her. And that means we do not yet understand what we are seeing. Cain's muscles tensed. His instincts screamed at him to move, to fight, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The temple's energy still held him, bound him, changed him. He clenched his fists. Then someone needs to start explaining, fast. Lethia lifted her head, her breathing still uneven, but her voice was steady. I saw something, in the ritual, she said. A presence. A shadow. Moran stiffened. And Cain saw it too. A murmur rippled through the gathered onlookers. Cain could feel their fear thickening the air. Moran's eyes darkened. The shadow has returned. Lethia exhaled. It was watching. Elder Amara's gaze flickered toward the temple's pillars, their crystal cores still pulsing erratically. Then we must act swiftly. She turned her attention fully on Cain. You are no longer merely an outsider, she said. You are something else. And until we understand what that means. Cain felt his muscles coil. Here it comes. You will remain under sacred watch. You will not leave the temple grounds. You will train under Lethia's guidance. Cain blinked. That's it. Moran scoffed. You should be destroyed. Cain shot him a smirk. Love you too, old man. Moran took a step forward, his energy crackling in the air like a coming storm. You do not belong here. Cain's amusement faded. Yeah. He flexed his fingers, feeling the strange new pulse of power thrumming just beneath his skin. Then why is your goddess keeping me alive? The moment the words left his mouth, the temple itself reacted. The crystal pillars flared, their resonance shifting into a low, vibrating hum. The light surrounding Cain and Lethia intensified, their matching markings pulsing in perfect harmony. Moran took a sharp step back, his expression twisting with something close to horror. Amara's voice was steady. Because, Elder Moran, the temple has already made its choice. And just like that, the verdict was sealed. Cain sat at the edge of a high balcony, watching as the twin suns dipped toward the crystalline horizon. Everything felt different. The temple's energy no longer simply surrounded him. It recognized him, moving through his limbs like something half familiar, half foreign. Lethia stood behind him, silent for a long time before she finally spoke. "You're adapting faster than I expected." Cain exhaled. "I don't even know what I'm adapting to." Lethia stepped closer. "The temple didn't just test you," she said softly. "It's changed you." Cain turned to face her. "And you?" She hesitated, but only for a moment. "Yes." A long silence stretched between them. Cain studied her, taking in the delicate glow that still lingered across her skin, the way her violet eyes seemed brighter now, more intense. "You're afraid," he said. Lethia stiffened slightly. "No." He arched a brow. She sighed, crossing her arms. "I don't understand what's happening to us," she admitted. "The temple has never done this before." Cain smirked. "You're saying I broke your ancient goddess magic?" Lethia shot him a sharp look. "You're not taking this seriously." Cain held up his hands. "Trust me, I am. Considering that if I hadn't been accepted, you'd be scraping what's left of me off the temple walls." Lethia frowned. Cain exhaled, his gaze drifting back toward the horizon. "Look," he muttered, "I get it. You weren't expecting this. Neither was I. But something happened in that ritual, something big, and I need to know what it means." Lethia studied him. "Then we find out. Together." Cain turned to her, and for the first time, he felt something unspoken pass between them. A connection neither of them had asked for. A bond that shouldn't exist. And yet it did. And neither of them could deny it anymore. The next morning, Elder Amara summoned them both. Cain had expected another round of cryptic warnings and veiled threats. Instead, she led them to the temple's deepest chamber, a place of forgotten prophecy. The walls of the chamber were alive with light, shifting inscriptions flickering across their crystalline surface. The energy here was different, not like the temple above. It was older, untouched, and at its center, a single scroll, not of parchment, not of crystal, but of liquid light. Lethia sucked in a sharp breath. The prophecy of the Forsaken Star. Cain frowned. "The what now?" Amara stepped forward. "A forgotten text. It speaks of the return of something long buried." Cain exhaled sharply. "And let me guess, I'm in it." Amara slowly unrolled the scroll. As the glowing script shifted, Cain felt something seize in his chest. Not words, not a vision, but recognition. His markings flared, and the temple's resonance roared to life. Cain's breath came slow and measured as the scroll of liquid light unrolled before them, revealing shifting inscriptions that moved like living constellations. The words were not static. They pulsed, reconfiguring, responding to the energy in the room. To his energy. Lethia stood beside him, her fingers twitching slightly, her markings glowing faintly in response. Elder Amara's voice was quiet but heavy. "The Forsaken Star shall fall from the sky, neither born of our kind nor belonging to another. A bridge between two worlds, an unwritten fate. A force meant to bring unity or ruin." Cain exhaled sharply. "That's vague as hell," he muttered. Lethia shot him a sharp look, but Amara only gave a small, knowing smile. Prophecies rarely speak plainly. Cain stepped closer to the floating script, watching as the luminous letters rippled at his approach. "But let's cut to the point," he murmured. "You think I'm this Forsaken Star?" Amara's gaze did not waver. "The temple did not reject you," she said. "And it did not reject Lethia. It has bound you together, something that has never happened before." Lethia swallowed, her eyes flickering between the scroll and Cain. "The prophecy speaks of an unwritten fate," she said softly. "If that's you, then." Cain's smirk was humorless. "Then even your gods don't know what to do with me." The scroll shuddered. Then, before their eyes, the script changed. A new line etched itself into existence. Words that had never been seen before, forming in real time as if the universe itself were still deciding what to write. "And when the Forsaken Star and the Priestess of Light become one, the future shall be rewritten. That which was broken shall be restored. That which was lost shall rise again. And the goddess's greatest secret shall be revealed." Lethia's breath hitched. Cain's pulse pounded. Then, before either of them could react, the chamber exploded with light. The energy ripped through them like a living storm. Cain staggered as visions crashed into his mind. Ancient memories not his own. He saw the creation of the temple, the first High Priestess, the birth of the scavenger race, and then the war, a battle fought in the void between worlds, before even the first temple was built. A war not between mortals, but between gods. Cain saw her, the goddess, not a distant, ethereal being, not a mere spiritual force. She had been real, flesh and power intertwined, a ruler, a warrior, a creator of life itself. And she had been betrayed. Cain gasped as the vision twisted, showing her fall. The temple was never just a place of worship, it was a prison. The goddess had not ascended. She had been sealed away. Lethia screamed. Cain's vision snapped back to the present as the scroll of light collapsed inward, vanishing into pure energy that slammed into both of them. The chamber groaned. The temple's resonance shifted. And deep beneath them, beneath the sacred ground where the first altar had been built, something stirred. Cain's knees hit the ground, his breath ragged. Lethia trembled beside him, her hands clutching at her chest, as if trying to contain the power surging through her. Elder Amara stood frozen. Even she had not expected this. The goddess. Lethia gasped. She's alive. Cain wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to steady himself. Not sure alive is the word I'd use, he muttered. But yeah, she's still here. A sharp, warning pulse rippled through the temple, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. The energy was rising. Then, a voice. Not in words. Not in sound. A presence. Who dares disturb my slumber? The temple shook. The goddess was waking up. The elders fell to their knees. Even Moran, who had cursed Cain's presence at every turn, bowed his head. Cain, however, did not move. A shape was forming in the center of the chamber, a figure of pure light, shifting, unfinished. The energy crackled, unstable, as if the goddess was not yet whole. You are not my chosen. The word slammed into Cain's skull with the force of 1,000 storms. But instead of knocking him down, it ignited him. The markings on his body blazed brighter. And for the first time since this all began, Cain understood. He had not been meant to be here. He was never supposed to enter the temple's bond. But something had gone wrong. The temple had tried to reject him, tried to unmake him, and it had failed. Cain's breath steadied. He felt Lethia's presence beside him, her power now tied to his. The goddess's form flickered. She was weak, and for the first time in eternity, afraid. Cain took a step forward. No, he said, his voice steady. I'm not your chosen. The goddess froze. Cain clenched his fists, feeling the raw, untamed power coursing through him. But I'm here anyway. The temple's pulse faltered. Cain exhaled, his smirk slow and sharp. So I guess that means we have a problem, don't we? The energy raged. Lethia grasped Cain's wrist, her own markings pulsing in sync with his. You can't fight a god, she whispered. Cain smirked. Not trying to. He turned back to the flickering form of the goddess. I get it now, he said. You were never supposed to die. You were supposed to be locked away. Your own people betrayed you. And now you want payback. The figure shuddered. Cain inhaled deeply. I'm not your enemy, he said. And neither is she. He tilted his head toward Lethia. So you have a choice, lady. You can wipe us out, burn the temple down, and keep playing the part of a vengeful god. Or, he spread his arms. You can let us fix what your people broke. The silence stretched. Then, the light dimmed. Cain felt the pressure lift, the air settling. The goddess stilled. You offer me freedom. Cain smirked. I offer you a second chance. The figure flickered, and then, with a final pulse of light, it vanished. The chamber calmed. Cain let out a slow breath. And deep within him, he felt the goddess's presence fade. She was gone, but her power remained. The temple never returned to what it was. The old ways faded. The goddess's rule ended. Cain and Lethia were bound, their energies permanently entwined. They had become something new. Not priest and warrior, not chosen and forsaken, but the beginning of something greater. A bridge between two worlds, a legend yet to be written. And as they stood together beneath the twin suns, their markings glowing in unison, Cain smirked. Well, he murmured, that wasn't so bad, was it? Lethia sighed, shaking her head with a laugh. And the future began.